3 things about white fragility every reader should know. Welcome to the Summercast.
Welcome to the Summercast, a podcast aimed at making fundamentalism great again by applying confessional Baptist doctrine to all of life.
My sister-in-law, who just started college, she just graduated high school and just started college, actually inspired me to make this video. And I don't even know if she's going to watch this, but if she does, hopefully it'll be helpful. And if she doesn't, hopefully it'll be helpful to other people. I want to talk about the book White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. And no, I haven't read the book. But here's the deal. My sister-in-law starts college. One of the classes that she has to take, obviously, is English. English is usually a requirement in every undergraduate program. And so she's enrolled, and she just started class. And of course, during the introduction period, everything's online. So she just received her reading list and all that, syllabi and whatever. And she found out that what is assigned is this book. One of the first books assigned is White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. Now, this is not a sociology class. This is not an economics class. This is not a political science class. This is just a simple English class, and they're assigning this book. So you can see this is Cerritos College. I think it's Cerritos City College. I don't know if it's City College or not, but it's Cerritos. They're in California, and I don't know the professor's name or anything like that. But he assigns this book. It's an English class. You know, you'd think you'd be assigning Shakespeare, Chaucer, go back and assign Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey, and maybe of Mice and Men, and things like Animal Farm by Orwell, and you think all of these great classics would be assigned. Maybe what they should assign is the Gulag Archipelago, but I'm sure that would be too heady for some of those professors there. So anyway, they assign this book. And what's interesting to me, first of all, before I get into these 3 reasons that I have kind of jotted down here of what everyone needs to know about this book before they even waste their time on it, is what's interesting to me is it's obviously a popular level book. It's like 180 pages, give or take. It has like a New York Times bestseller sticker. Every time some book is New York Times bestseller, it's always popular level. And no book that is properly academic has ever made the New York Times #1 bestseller list. Just because real scholarly work hardly ever gets attention and it doesn't have that wide of a readership. So it's very rare for something that is properly academic to make it onto that New York Times list. So it's a popular level book, yet it's being assigned at an institution for higher learning. And I think an undergraduate degree is still considered higher learning. I don't know. It probably shouldn't be. But it's always funny to me to see professors who just are like, I'll throw that on the syllabus. It's almost like they just go through like the New York Times bestseller list. And they're like, oh yeah, this would be good for my class. This would be good. And then they assign all this hogwash. And it's not properly academic. It's not properly fit for an institution of higher learning, yet it's assigned, and stuff like this is assigned all the time in schools. It's not even just liberal schools that this happens at. I had assigned some very shallow stuff during my time at Bible college, so it happens everywhere. Anyway, what I wanted to do is this book's been floating around. It was published in 2018, so it's been around for a couple of years. It's not really new, but as of recently, it's really been floating around. It's being promoted by the whole social justice crowd in evangelicalism, and so I thought it might be good to do an episode on it, paired with the fact that my sister-in-law received this assignment to read this book. Now, the subtitle is, as you can tell, why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism. And what I'll do here is I'll actually read through some of the synopsis of the book for you so that you can understand the trajectory of the author in this particular work of literature, if we can even call it that. It says this, and this is the synopsis that they put on Amazon. In this, quote, vital, necessary, and beautiful book, unquote, and that quote is attributed to Michael Eric Dyson. I don't know who that is, but apparently he endorsed the book. Anti-racist educator Robin DiAngelo deftly illuminates the phenomenon of white fragility and, quote, allows us to understand racism as a practice not restricted to, subquote, bad people, end subquote, end quote, and that is attributed to Claudia Rankine. Referring to the defensive moves that white people make when challenged racially, white fragility is characterized by emotions such as anger, fear, and guilt, and by behaviors including argumentation and silence. Okay, so let's go ahead and stop there. I'm not going to read the entire thing. A couple of things that I want to note before we jump into this is notice how they now characterize as race. They now characterize racism as like an attribute of people who aren't necessarily bad. And to put this in Christian language, racism is now something that is part of you, something that you might not be able to help, and so you may not be a bad person, yet still be a racist. Let me first just point out how that cheapens the sin of racism. Just understand with me for a moment here how that cheapens the sin of racism. You have riots and protests going on right now, and especially a couple of months ago, where people are bashing other people's skulls in because those people whose skulls are now bashed in are said to be racist. And so obviously there is a bad guy here that people like DiAngelo and those who follow the ideology of this book have identified. The terrible thing about it is that racism is no longer characterized as a sin. It's characterized as something that is ingrained in you as part of your identifying makeup. It's part of what makes you, racism is. And because you can't help it, you are not a bad person, but you are a problem. You become a problem even though you can't help it. Right? So first of all, there's really no justice for racism because racism is not a sin, but it's defined as something that accrues to a person's character or nature according to their skin color, and so they're racist by default. White people are racist by default. They can't help it. At least Western white people are. They're racist by default. And since racism isn't a sin, but it's still a problem, it needs to be dealt with. So there are a couple of things that happen here that I really can't get into here, but the possibility of repentance from racism is made impossible. It's non-existent. You can't repent from something that you don't understand is wrong. Right? And it's saying here that bad people can be racist. Or no, that actually good people can be racist. A person can be racist without being bad. And the whole essence of repentance is that the person who repents understands that there's something in them that is bad, that they're going to turn from, that they are not a perfect person and therefore need to turn from their imperfections toward perfection. Or they need to turn from that which is evil within them to that which is good. Okay? And without racism being a sin and it just being an attribute that belongs to you because you're white, there's something that's even deeper and even more problematic. Because no longer can you repent from racism. No longer can you make reparations for your racism. Other than if you just go away. Other than if you just go away. And that's what it's turning into. Identity politics always turns into a genocidal roller coaster. This is what happened with Hitler and the Jews. It's always what happens when people are subjugated according to their ethnicity and their ethnicity alone. When human beings are turned into a different species, and then that species is seen as something that is problematic within that particular society. So you have a subpopulation which exists within a broader population. That broader population sees that subpopulation as problematic. And that subpopulation isn't necessarily committing any kind of particular societal sin. It's just who they are that is the problem. And that is the tactic that you're seeing right here in this introduction. Okay, so let's get away from that. According to D'Angelo, I'm already showing my white fragility because, again, white fragility is characterized by emotions such as anger, fear, and guilt, and by behaviors including argumentation and silence. So here are the three things. And now I'm not going to talk about that. What you just heard was the closest I'm actually going to get to the race issue. Here is a critique of the strategy of her book. Okay? And so here's the thing. Number one, Robin J. D'Angelo wants you to be on her side. Robin J. D'Angelo wants you to be on her side. What's that mean? Well, she wants you to be on her side. She wants you to accept everything that she says without question. And here's how I know that. Because if you are bold enough to disagree with the subject matter of this book, you are simply exerting or exemplifying your white fragility. And thus you can be dismissed as someone that just merely has a perennial racial problem. Right? Something that you cannot detect because of your socioeconomic / ethnic background. All right? So if you want to argue against anything in this book, you're automatically wrong from the outset. And you're wrong from the outset because your argumentation itself has been characterized as an expression of your white fragility, which is the problem that the book seeks to expose. So there's no getting ahead. You lose either way. You're not allowed to disagree with Robin D'Angelo. And you're not allowed to disagree with those who follow her, who agree with her, who are on her same bandwagon. So that's the first thing. She wants you to be on her side, and she wants you to be on her side at the expense of reason. This book does not treat its readers like human beings. Human beings are people who have the faculty of reason. They have been given a mind to question things for themselves. Within the scientific community, people are always encouraged to test, and retest, to experiment, to test the hypothesis that you began with. And then hopefully, after the process of experimentation, you begin to flesh out some conclusions that hopefully justify your hypothesis. But if not, it renders your hypothesis false, and you need to start over and figure something else out. But Robin D'Angelo doesn't want you to think like that. Robin D'Angelo doesn't want you to be a progressive human being. It doesn't matter what skin color you are. Robin D'Angelo thinks that just you using your reason is an expression of your white fragility, and thus you should just be pushed to the side if you can't agree with her. Now, this is not how human beings engage and or interact with one another. Human beings, again, have been given the faculty of reason. That sets us apart from the rest of the animal kingdom. We are different from every single species of animal on this planet because we reason. We are self-reflective. We explore the world around us, and indeed, we're conscious of the world around us. Robin DiAngelo doesn't want you to use your mind in order to evaluate the subject matter that she has published. And if you do use your mind or some kind of intellectual rubric to evaluate her work, you are considered someone who is expressing white fragility, and therefore your argumentation, your disagreement is just scooted over to the side. It's just pushed over to the side, and it's discounted as nothing but a mere expression of your white privilege. So she wants you to be on her side. If you don't adopt everything she says, if you don't agree with her without question, without argumentation, if you don't agree with her, you are invalid, and you do not deserve a hearing. Now let me ask you this question. Is that the kind of world you want to live in? Do you want to live in a world where you are not allowed to have an opinion? If you do have an opinion, you are merely expressing something that is undesirable, something that needs to be dealt with and eventually expunged from the midst of our society. Do you want to live in a world like that? Because I can tell you that there are groups of people who have lived in a world like that. The Jews in the 1940s lived in a world like that. The victims of communist Russia, Russian citizens, lived in a world like that. You were not allowed to question. You were not allowed to question Lenin or Stalin. You were not allowed to question the strategy. You were not allowed to question the ideology. You were wrong from the outset. You did not have a voice. Is that the kind of world you want to live in? Because here, let me tell you something about this. That once you give up your voice, let's say just tomorrow, immediately, the white voice becomes completely suppressed. My YouTube channel is taken away. Every person who is white and has any kind of white or Anglo background, their voice is completely squashed, silenced. Do you think, in all reality, that kind of suppression is going to stop with white people? I mean, do you really think that? No, it's not. It's not going to stop with white people. It's going to roll on. That's how these things always work. That's what history teaches us. So that's the first thing. She wants you to be on her side at the expense of really your humanity, right? You have to give up your powers of reason and all of that. You just have to accept what she says and be the greatest dogmatist in all the world, right? And just accept everything she says without argumentation or question. Give up your humanity, give up your right to reason. Secondly, the very title of the book commits an informal logical fallacy called a hasty generalization. And what a hasty generalization does is it applies to all what is not necessarily applicable to all right? And so let's say, for example, you walk into a room of 100 people, but you only meet 2 of those people, and 2 of those people have red hats on their heads. And you leave that room and you go somewhere else and you tell all of your friends, I met 2 people with red hats on their heads, therefore all the people in that room must have had red hats on their heads. Well, that's not true. It's not true that just because 2 people wore red hats, that therefore everybody had red hats on in their room, in that room full of 100 people. What Robin DiAngelo does is she begins the title of her book with a universal: white. White fragility. Therefore, anyone who participates or shares in that universal in whiteness is someone who is fragile. Everyone. Okay? And then the subtitle, why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism. All right? And it's funny and ironic because really the classical definition, she would be meeting the classical definition of racism right here in the title of her book. And that's really just what she's doing is she's characterizing an entire people group based on what she would call their race, which corresponds directly to skin color and, more broadly speaking, ethnicity. And actually people, for a true racist divide humanity up and subjugate humanity and characterize humanity according to different races. It's racialism is what that is called. And the second you observe and think that all human anthropology is divisible into these neat little categories called races, and then you begin further characterizing those races by things like skin color, ethnicity, economic status, etc., you've become a racist, according to the classical definition. And so the second thing that she does on the very cover of her book, and you can see it in the introduction, is she begins with a hasty generalization. And if she cannot begin her argumentation, if she cannot begin her work without committing an informal logical fallacy, it's probably not worth your time to go on and read the rest of the book. I'm just going to let you know that now. There's not going to be a whole lot. If the title, which is short and brief, cannot be logical, then what makes you think that pages and pages and pages of subject matter are all going to check out logically? I mean, really, it's probably not worth your time. Thirdly, and lastly, her book is racist. It is literally racist. And let me point out why I think that. First, again, as I've already mentioned, she's characterizing an entire people group according to their skin color. And if you take the law of contraries seriously, the implication is that there are blacks, right? There are whites and blacks, and those people are part of different racial groups, right? I mean, she even says it in the introduction. These behaviors in turn function to reinstate white racial equilibrium and prevent any meaningful cross-racial dialogue. Interestingly, there she says that you can't have meaningful dialogue without white silence. So white people, or at least white agreement with the narrative that's being pushed. I'm not allowed to disagree with D'Angelo's subject matter, her content, right? If I do that, I'm exposing myself as a fragile white male, okay? And so I can't disagree. I have to agree, and then I have to go on to propagate what she has written here if I am to make a difference, if I am to do the right thing. The only way you can win, and really in the final analysis you can never win with these kinds of people, is if you agree wholly with them. But even when you agree wholly with them, there are other things, right? Because notice at the beginning of the summary, it allows us to understand racism as a practice not restricted to bad people. You are racist by virtue of who you are as a white human being. Okay? And since that's the case, there is no winning. There is no winning. You can agree 100%, but then guess what? Someone will come out and they'll say, well, you're only agreeing as a form of tokenism, right? You're only trying to make it look like you're not racist, right? You're agreeing, you're pandering, you are committing cultural appropriation by agreeing and supporting these minority groups and so on and so forth. So there's no winning. There's always going to be an accusation of racism out there. And it's always going to be based on the fact that you are, as a white person, part of an Anglo tradition, which is now being seen as something that is evil, wicked, and wrong. And the reason for that is because Anglo tradition is what gave us our democratic republic. And it's what gave us a lot of things that has to do with the country in which we live. And when I say Anglo, I really only mean Western European tradition. It doesn't matter what skin color or ethnicity. The people who lived there that were from different ethnic backgrounds, who were different skin colors, they adopted, they assimilated into this way of life as well. And so it's the mindset, is the philosophical, sociological mindset of the Western European culture and society that gave us what we have now. And because we have people out there who want us to live in a communist utopia, well, everything that gave us a democratic republic needs to go. The democratic republic is the enemy. And if you don't see that, you need to open your eyes. The democratic republic is the enemy. The DNA of this nation is the enemy. It has none of this has anything to do with race. Go on the Black Lives Matter website and you can see that their agenda is to undermine the nuclear family unit. And every person who stands with the Black Lives Matter movement all have benefited from the idea or the principle of the nuclear family unit. And here they are standing with this wicked organization to tear down that which gave them so much. To tear down the very mechanism that stands at the very foundation of our nation, which is the nuclear family unit. All of that has to go. The family unit has to go. The democracy has to go. The nature of the republic has to go. All of that has to go if we are to establish a communist utopia. This goes much deeper than race. And those of you who are being assigned this kind of garbage, it's not about race. It's not about race. Race is just an entryway into the deeper and darker hellscape that is critical theory and the outworkings of communist ideology like Marxism and then the Frankfurt School. And, you know, what you're going to see and what we've already seen is that this is not so much about race as it is about wealth distribution. We've already seen the campaign, right? We've already seen the campaign for it. Wealth distribution. And that, my friends, is a communist, that is a communist idea. The idea of wealth distribution. Because again, if everybody needs to make the same amount of money, if everybody needs to live in the same kind of house and all that, etc., 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 then there cannot be economic disparity. Economic disparity must be seen as something that is wicked. Anyway, I came on here to give you 3 things you should know about this book before you crack it open and waste your time on it. My take on it, I'm not going to waste my time. With a book titled, with a book that has a racist title is really not going to get my time of day. If it said Black Fragility, I wouldn't waste my time with it. It would be a racist title. If you were to replace the word white on here with black, how offensive, how offended do you think people would be? Could you imagine the outcry? Do you think that the New York Times would put it on its list of bestsellers, even if it was a bestseller? Really? Black Fragility. Why it's so hard for black people to talk about racism. Could you imagine the outrage? And the cries of racism and the blame that would be going on? Could you imagine it? No, you couldn't. Could you imagine if people started talking about black people like Robin DiAngelo does here to white people? And the ironic thing about it is, of course, Robin is white. And, you know, given her logic and or the lack thereof, why couldn't I just come out and say, you know what? Robin is just a panderer. She's actually a racist, and I can tell she's a racist because she's coming out as a white person to support something like Black Lives Matter, right? She's just writing these books at a popular level so that she can virtue signal. She's just a panderer. She's a racist, and I can tell she's a fragile white person, and I can tell because she's coming out in support of this movement. You know, one of the things that people do, and this is this is just a reality. It's not something you have to be a psychologist to understand and observe. When people think that they've offended someone, they kind of like overplay their hand, right? We've all seen it, right? They try to be extra nice. And if Robin DiAngelo is over here thinking like, well, I'm a racist, she's like, I'm a racist by virtue of my whiteness. And she wants to like overcompensate, right? And so she wants to go in and throw herself into this work and start writing about racism so she can virtue signal and say, hey, look, I'm not like the rest of white people. I actually care. And I'm not a racist. And it's just this big, gigantic virtue signal. Well, somebody to that could just say, well, you're pandering. You just feel guilty about your racism, and so really you're just and that's just really applying her own line of thought to her own work. It's just a big, gigantic house of cards, and if you ask me, it's not worth your time. Anyway, guys, I hope that you found this episode helpful. Again, I don't even know if my sister-in-law is going to watch this. I'll recommend it to her, maybe. Hopefully she does. If she doesn't, hopefully it was useful to some of you guys. If you liked it, give me a thumbs up. If not, give me a thumbs down. And leave me a comment. And then also, don't forget to click the subscribe button. Thanks. Have a good night.